Shabbat Shalom. So, it didn't occur to me it was 45 years since my bar mitzvah until like the middle of last week. And then I started thinking, of course, the obvious. Time really has passed. Not in vain, right? You can see how time has passed. I remember that day as if it was yesterday. And there's some things that I remember more than others. I remember my outfit. By the way, my parents only used slides. They never used actual real pictures. So all of my slides for my bar mitzvah are in carousels of those Kodak projectors. And I never get to see them. But I do remember my outfit. My outfit was a green corduroy suit. It was something, okay? And because we couldn't find my size in Mexico, I had to come to the States to buy it in the Huskies department of JCPenney's. So, it was a whole to-do. It was a day that I will never forget for many reasons. I think back on it, everybody was there. Everybody who's not here anymore was there. But so many things have changed and so many things remain the same, right? We have changed as people, as human beings, individually, personally. Our lives may be better or worse, but nothing remains the same. However, there's one thing that I can't get off my mind. And yes, I'm going to talk a little bit about the hostages this Shabbat, because we have to. It's something that's very much on our minds. And by the way, I want to warn you not to break out the champagne just yet. Okay? I've always looked at the time when I became a bar mitzvah, because it was 4 years after Entebbe, 8 years after Munich. Right? I remember every single anti-Semitic act perfectly well. It's really one of those things where we can time our lives and we can remember who we were and where we were by what our enemies were doing. Now, I don't want to spend hours talking about our enemies, but I think today it is important to remember, especially when we're reading Parashat Shemot. Parashat Shemot is a stark warning. And when my rabbi told me this 43 years ago when I started studying with him, Rabbi Lehrer, he told me, watch this Torah portion, because it repeats and it repeats and it repeats itself. And I was like 11 years old. What did I know? What did I know? But here it goes. I received an email from one of our members, a beautiful email, telling me he came to this realization that Parashat Shemot was all about anti-Semitism. This is where anti-Semitism starts. So I said, I'm sorry to correct you, but no. Anti-Semitism starts with Potiphar's wife. Potiphar's wife, when she doesn't get her way, what does she do? She turns around and says, look what this Hebrew boy is doing to us. That was the first act of individual anti-Semitism. The first time we see in any source, any written source that we have, any human being called somebody out for being Jewish. But this Shabbat, Parashat Shemot, is the first time when we have institutional anti-Semitism. What do I mean by that? Pharaoh orders the midwives, Shifra and Puah, and we're going to talk about them in a second, to kill all the baby boys. Because Pharaoh now thinks, first of all, they're multiplying, so let's kill the boys. But also, according to the Midrash, somebody whispered in his ear that one of these boys was going to take away his kingdom from him. By the way, that same motif repeats itself in history. Now, what happens? Pharaoh tells the midwives to kill the boys, Shifra and Puah. By the way, the Torah says, Amiladot ha'Ibriot, the Hebrew midwives. And when I was teaching my class on Monday, I caught myself saying the Hebrew midwives, but it's really not to be understood the way it's written on the Torah. There needs to be a comma. There needs to be a separation there. Because it's not clear that Shifra and Puah were Jewish. And there's a huge debate in our sources about it. The Talmud says they were Jewish. But some commentators like Abravanel and the Shadal say, absolutely not. If they would have been Hebrews, what's the big deal? They saved the Jewish boys. Any Jewish mother would have done that. They would have stood up to Pharaoh. What's most incredible about the midwives is that they were not Jewish, and they stood up to Pharaoh. They defied their own king to save Jewish boys. I actually firmly believe that, by the way. That's why I caught myself on Monday when I made that assumption that they were Jewish. Shifra and Pua. And they were Irot Elohim. They were fearful of God. What does that mean? It doesn't mean they were afraid of the consequences of not saving the boys. According to Abravanel, it means that they understood what the God of Israel stood for, and that God was a real God and Pharaoh was not God. So this is the first attempt at institutionalized anti-Semitism. Let's kill them all. It's not directed against Joseph, against one. It's directed against an entire people. And time again, in our history, we see it. I want to share with you a little anecdote that happened to me many years ago when I went on the March of the Living with a group of kids from Temple Beth Sholom. I'm from Las Vegas. And we were in the same bus as some children from San Diego. And when we got to Poland, one of the stops was, of course, the Warsaw Ghetto, where the Warsaw Ghetto used to be. And I don't know if you've ever been to Poland, but when I go to Poland, and I try never to go to Poland, this is one of my places where I really try never to have a layover, never to be there by chance. We had a security guard with our bus at all times. And I had thought the security guard was going to be an Israeli guard. But it turned out it was a Polish Special Forces soldier. And I was so upset. Like, I woke up in the morning looking at this young man, and I had all this resentment against him. It was horrible. I mean, this really kept me up at night. I didn't want to be looked after by a Polish soldier. I really didn't. I complained. Thank God nobody listened to me, you know. And in one of those stops that I told you, the Warsaw Ghetto, we were talking about righteous Gentiles. And one of the San Diego children said, well, of course there weren't enough righteous Gentiles. Would you be a righteous Gentile? Would you have risked your life for the Jews? What do you want the righteous Gentiles to do? Do you want them to die? Do you want their families to die? You cannot blame people for not standing up to the Nazis. And just as I was about to just strangle this kid, this Polish soldier stood up and said, you are absolutely wrong. His name, he's now my Facebook friend, Michael Kietzora, I will never forget. So who's Michael? Michael stood up and says, you're absolutely wrong. My grandparents saved 25 Jews. How? He says, look, I'm not really a soldier in my daily life. I'm a cherry farmer. We own a cherry farm in the north. And in our farm, my grandparents saved 25 Jews, 2 entire families. And there's trees for them in Yad Vashem. And I go every year to put flowers on their trees. He says, I honor these trees more than their own graves because it reminds me of the shortcomings of the Polish people and also of the greatness of the human spirit. Now, I was now crying. Everybody was crying. I hugged him. I apologized 10 times to him. I really did. An incredible, incredible young man. But I learned something that I've never forgotten. As bad as our enemies have been, there's always been righteous Gentiles. Kind of. No matter how horrible the Nazis were, there's always a story about a soldier. There's always a story about a neighbor who found the conscience of the humanity to save life. And here we are. On this Shabbat, we were on pins and needles, waiting for the hostages, at least 33 of them, to come home. We do not know if they're alive or dead, or how many are. We have a suspicion, but we don't really know. And here's the true thing that we have to learn from Parshat Shemot. In Egypt, there were righteous Gentiles. In Nazi Germany, there were righteous Gentiles. During the Inquisition, there were righteous Gentiles. Find me one in Gaza. For all of those of us who believe that Israel is equal to blame on this, we have to think hard again. Where are the righteous Gentiles? Where are the people that said, oh my God, two-year-old babies, let's save them? Where the hell is their humanity? They have none. And that's why those midwives are so remarkable in the Torah portion. They stood up to the most powerful man in the world and they defied him. And in the whole Gaza Strip, not one of them, not even when offered $5 million or $10 million. There's a part of the Haggadah, Ve'ishe hamda lavoteinu. You all remember this. We take the cup, we lean towards the side, and we sing, Ve'ishe hamda. It's beautiful. What does it mean? The promise that God will save us because in every generation they will rise up against us to kill us. And then the whole Haggadah goes into this diatribe of who was worse, Laban or Pharaoh, right? Pharaoh only wanted to kill the children. Laban wanted the whole people. I mean, it's a crazy thing if you look at it in retrospect. The Haggadah didn't have modernity. But I will offer you this today. Who's worse, the Nazis or Hamas? And I know this is an unfair comparison to make. But here's another comparison. The Nazis tried as much as they could to erase any evidence of what they did. They destroyed Treblinka. They tried to dismantle Majdanek. They started to dismantle Auschwitz. They just didn't have enough time. Because even though there were murderers and beasts and animals, they knew that what they were doing was wrong. These Hamas terrorists, what did they do? They called their mother on the phone. Hey, Mom, I just murdered 5 Jews. They put it on social media. They want the world to see their depravity. This is our enemy. And that's why I tell you today, do not break out the champagne yet. Because we have no idea what is next with these people. Whenever I hear, and there was a quote in the RJ where one of our local rabbis who was asked, what do you think about the ceasefire? And he said, oh, however the carnage ends, it has to stop. That's the most ridiculous thing any Jew could ever say. What carnage? Do we remember October 7th? It's important for us to remember. It's important. And by the way, I understand what's happening in Israeli society, the polarization. Should we sign the deal? Should we not sign the deal? Look, we all are torn. If it was one of our children, of course we want to sign the deal. If my children were serving in the army, of course I want to sign the deal. If one of my children died in the army defending Israel, I said, why did he die in vain? For what? You have all of these different positions. And it's impossible to come to one conclusion. But the one thing we know is that we cannot let our guard down because we do not know what happens tomorrow. And we cannot buy into that narrative that we're equally guilty for what's happening in Gaza. Remember October 7th. Remember what you saw on TV. Remember how they walked into those homes in those kibbutzim and they murdered people left and right for no reason. Remember how they put babies in the ovens, how they split open the bellies of pregnant women. I've seen that. I have seen those pictures in Israel with my own eyes. I'm telling you today, we need more people like those midwives, like Shifra and Pua. And you will not find them in Gaza or any place where radical Islam shows its horrible and putrefied face. Make no mistake, Islam is not a religion of peace. It's time that we wake up to this idea that we want to be nice to everybody, but we can't. We cannot let our guard down. Let me give you another example. Do you remember the day when there was a massacre in a mosque in New Zealand? I went with my colleague Brad Techtil and my colleague Pastor Josh Tice to the mosque downtown. And we stood there when they were praying in solidarity with them because we felt in our own skin the depravity of humanity. How many calls did I get on October 8th? How many people came here from that community to stand with us? Not a single one. So even when it comes to our enemies, there are enemies and there are enemies. And let me remind you, again, it's 45 years, so I can go a little longer today. Don't tell Liz that I said that because she'll kill me. Elie Wiesel, I've told you this probably 10 times. My favorite quote from Elie Wiesel, when they asked him the biggest lesson of his life, and he replies, "More than believing the promises of my friends, I have to take the threats of my enemies seriously." This is where we're at. I hope and pray that I am wrong, and that when these hostages come back, we hear stories of how they were helped and kept alive. But that's not going to happen. Be prepared. To be strong and be resolute, like the Torah says. Because we are not at the end of anything. We are at the beginning of a horrible, horrible conclusion of another nightmare. So 45 years after my bar mitzvah, I just wish one thing upon the world, that more people would be like Shifra and Pua, like all of us find our humanity and save babies left and right, whoever they are, from whichever ethnicity, religion, whatever background they have, that we save people, that we find our common humanity with others, because that's what it means to be Or Lagoim. We shouldn't be fighting wars. We should be projecting this message of hope and of light. And every day that the world prevents us from doing so, it's to their loss, but also to ours. Shabbat Shalom u'mevorach. Let us please rise, page 184.